Welcome to the Healing My Parts podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and raising awareness about dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID. We are your hosts, the system behind Healing My Parts, which also includes parts that function as a therapist and leader in a mental health niche space. We'll be sharing tips and tools that have helped us and many others, while also sharing insights from our own journey of living with the condition. We'll also be hosting guests for conversations to help educate, dispel myths, and most especially help those living with dissociative identities and professionals who treat the condition. Thank you so much for tuning in. And now, let's get healing. Welcome to the show, everyone. We're so excited to introduce you to a really special guest today. We have therapist and author Sally Maslansky with us today. And because she has such an impressive background and life experience, I'm not going to attempt to do a bio. I'm just going to say, Sally, welcome. And would you be willing to do a self-introduction and let folks know what it is you'd like them to know about you?
Yes, first, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I don't know how impressive my background is, but I have written a book about my lived experience of DID. And I'm a therapist as well. I'm an LMFT. And I think the most important thing to know about me for this is that I was inspired to write the book because in 2022, I think Dan Siegel, who was my therapist for many years and who treated me for DID, decided to do a course about DID. And I suggested that he allow me to tell the story of the work because my outcome has been so positive in my life that I just really wanted to share it. And he eventually agreed. At first, he was hesitant because he's my therapist, but our work was many years ago. So finally, he agreed, and we did the course, and it aired twice. And each time there were live Q&As. And in the Q&As, a few things happened. One was I was always aware how misunderstood DID was, but I didn't understand the extent to how misunderstood it was within our field of mental health practitioners. I really misunderstood, not the experience of it and how ways to work with it as a therapist. And the other two questions that I wanted to address was because people asked me privately and in the live Q&As, what was my experience of DID and what did Dr. Siegel do that was so healing? Because unlike many forms of therapy, interpersonal neurobiology, which is Dan's field, is not a form of therapy. What he says is it informs therapy. And so I just really wanted to share my experience. And thus I wrote this book, and it's called A Brilliant Adaptation: How Dissociative Identity Disorder and the Therapeutic Bonds and the Power of the Therapeutic Bonds Saved Me. And that's truly the story that I've told, and I think it's being received pretty well. So I think it's resonating. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you about that experience.
So excited about this conversation that we're going to have. I mean, first, the title of the book in and of itself is brilliant.
Yes.
Because it doesn't seem to focus on a quote unquote disorder.
Yes.
So I wonder a couple of things. If you would be willing to share a little bit about how your journey began, for you personally, maybe in therapy, and then kind of moving into this concept of adaptation.
Yes. So I was 37 when I went to therapy with Dan. And up until then, I hadn't really thought there was, well, not even then, I didn't think there was something wrong with me. In the year, 1990, my husband and I went to Romania and adopted our son, Sam. And Sam was 16 months old and had spent his first 16 months of life in a Romanian orphanage. And when we brought him home, and as soon as I got to Romania, I'd always felt afraid. I always was afraid I was in trouble. But I didn't think, it wasn't debilitating. It just was always with me. I'd kind of learned to manage it. It may have been somewhat debilitating, actually, but I wasn't living as though it was. I didn't know that other people didn't feel that. And when we got to Romania, before we even got Sam, I got filled with the sensation of terror. Truly terror, like I was going to be arrested. Didn't think Paul was going to be arrested, my husband, just me. And it wasn't that weird because we were in a country that was just 6 months after a massively bloody, violent revolution. it didn't make sense to my husband because we traveled a lot and I felt very safe with him, but I didn't feel safe in Romania. We got Sam, we came home, and I didn't know what it meant to have had a 16-month-old baby who'd spent the first 16 months of his life in an orphanage. Even though I'd read every book about being a parent and childhood development, none of that had addressed that. So I went to UCLA, and the director of the infant toddler clinic was Dan Siegel, a very young Dan Siegel. And the way that he approached Sam was just with such positivity. And he thought Sam had done really well. He had no doubts that Sam was going to developmentally catch up and we would be good. He would be fine. But I remember thinking, if I ever need to see a therapist, I'm gonna go to this guy because he was just so positive, and we had a lot of people in our life, including friends that were psychiatrists, who were like thought we were crazy to go work to Romania, and Dr. Siegel wasn't. He was joyful to him. Anyway, a year later, this sensation of terror had not quieted down, and I was afraid there was something wrong with my son, like there was some deep buried something. And so I went to him because I wanted him to help me figure out, A, why I felt it, was it true? But at the core of it, I think my fear was, how am I ever going to help my son as he grows understand how his life began? I think I even said, how could anybody understand that? And Dan, who had worked with Sam in that clinic, had been keeping tabs on him to make sure he met his developmental markers, knew Sam was fine. So he started to ask me some questions about my own childhood. And when he asked me what kind of childhood I had. I said, I had a good childhood. And he said, well, tell me about it. And I was kind of like, I didn't know what I was, it was weird. I thought, I couldn't figure out why that was a weird question, but it felt like a weird question. And I didn't say anything. And he said, can you tell me about your childhood? I said, I don't know what you mean. He said, well, you said you had a good childhood. Tell me something good about it. And I said, I don't remember my childhood. And he very lovingly and gently said, how do you know it was good then? And that was just this was the first time I realized that I didn't know, I had no idea what it meant, but I knew it was significant that I was 37 and didn't remember my childhood, but also that I didn't until that moment think there was something that I should probably look at. So that started my journey in therapy with Dr. Siegel. So I think it's important for clinicians, especially and people who are dealing with trauma of any type in their own lives. The way I think about that was going to Romania it was an attachment event for me. I was becoming a mother, right? And I think it's important for us to watch, as a therapist, I see it, when attachment events happen, whether it's, you know, becoming a mother, getting married, going off to college, or kids going off to college, any of those kind of marriages, becoming a grandparent, all of those, that whole cycle tends to bring stuff up. And it can be little stuff or it can be big stuff. It's just something to kind of be aware of and look for, because it's not abnormal for when your children leave home to like kind of fall apart. But if the falling apart is beyond just I'm sad that my kid's gone and we can't recover from it, that's a signal that we might need to do some more deeper work. So that was how my journey, and within a few short months, he diagnosed me with what was then still known as multiple personality disorder. Now DID, of course. Yeah.
First, how fortuitous to get Dan Siegel as your therapist.
I mean, so lucky, yes. And total
That's phenomenal.
coincidence. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
When you think back, do you remember what it was like for you to receive information about your diagnosis back in the 90s?
Mm.
There's so many different narratives today where people are either shrouded in shame, curious, or I don't
Yeah.
know, there's something else there that's more positive.
Yes.
But I'm curious what yours was like. The 90s was not an easy time for a
No.
lot of people.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, it was MPD, not DID. And somehow later I found DID more approachable, but also because of the cultural idea of what MPD was, in my mind, was all about the movie Sybil. And so when he first told me, my first reaction was when he said multiple personality disorder, I was sort of like, well, okay, it sort of made sense. I mean, just suddenly I thought, oh, okay. And he told me a little bit about what it meant. He'd had no idea that I had this Sybil model in my head. But then I was like, really though, Sybil, right? Are you kidding me? And when I first went to see him that very first time when I was terrified, I asked him at the end of our session, I said, am I crazy? And he said, no, you're not crazy. So when he told me I had multiple personality disorder, I said, so I'm actually crazy. And that's when he said, no, Sally. He said, you're not crazy. He said, I'd say you're actually the exact opposite of crazy. And I don't know if he said it that day, but very quickly was when he said, I really do believe that multiple personality disorder is a brilliant adaptation to a difficult childhood, right? So from the get-go with him, there was no shame. There wasn't something wrong with me. It was actually everything that was right with me. But now we had very real work to do to uncover what my childhood that I had no memory of was, and how the states of mind of my MPD, how my mind fragmented to deal with it. And again, so positive. And in fact, I haven't heard a lot of other, not that I'm an expert, other people than Dan talk about approach MPD, DID from an attachment basis that I had. What he diagnosed me first with was a disorganized attachment. And the way he explained disorganized attachment to me was, as a young child, your attachment circuitry, you're hardwired to go towards your caregivers for care and safety. And then you also have your brainstem, which tells you to get away from the source of danger when you're being hurt. And he said disorganized attachment can result when the people that your brain is telling you to go towards for help are the same people that are hurting you. A child's mind cannot make sense of that, and it fragments. And that's what DID is. He said we think of it as a biological paradox, fear without solution. And that description just put me right in childhood. Not that there was something bad about me, but that I was in a situation that I couldn't face. And that's how my mind handled it. And I don't want to give the impression that that made it easy work or not painful work, because it was extremely hard and painful. But the pain wasn't from the therapeutic experience. The pain was from the unraveling, the unfolding of what my childhood had been.
I love the fact that you were given this positive framework from the get-go, because I honestly do think that's somewhat unique back in the 90s. As
Yes.
somebody who was also, I was diagnosed in 93.
Okay.
And what I recall a lot of, besides the influence of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation getting in the way of access to care, was this primarily pathological framework of you're sick, there's something wrong with you, we have to quote fix you. And there was nothing strength based in from what I saw. So I think it's really interesting that you were given this framework of here's how you can understand it. It makes so much sense the way that he told you.
Yeah. And, another part of interpersonal neurobiology is the making sense process. And I'm going to give you the interpersonal neurobiology definition of it, of making sense.
Oh,
It's at the beginning of my book too. So making sense, and think about this for DID. This is making sense for anything, but okay, a process of sorting through memory, here and now experience, and imagination such that we create a coherent picture of the essence of what is occurring in our lives. Making sense can be seen as an integrative process linking our past, our present, and potential future in a way that enables these elements of thought, feeling, memory, and imagination to situate us in a social world of experience.
That's beautiful.
And something that I find really, the way I started to understand my fragmenting, my states of mind, my dissociated self states, was that they were what the dissociated self states of my mind were the elements of thought, feeling, memory, and imagination, and sensations, and everything else. It's so Dr. Siegel would talk about the self states as verbs, not nouns.
Oh, interesting.
So the way that my mind fragmented was to absorb what was happening to me in any moment that I needed help in the form. So I'd have a state of mind that had a feeling of shame. I'd have a state of mind that could think about what was going on, that kept it separated from me. But it was a verb, it was a flow. It wasn't, as he would say, they weren't nounified, they weren't fixed entities. It was a flow, it was a process. And so I just always thought of this process of me as a little kid, you know, facing situations as a little kid. And we all know, if anyone who's been around children or has children knows, that young children can be incredibly creative and resourceful. And that's how I think of my dissociated self states, even the ones that were terrifying to me. I came to just so value because of their resourcefulness and their resiliency that they protected for me.
Can you see my brain's trying to wrap around the,
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
movement from noun to verb? I'm like, hold on, concept for me.
It helped me make sense of it in a way that I wasn't different people, but I had hundreds of different ways that were just stacked up in my brain to get me through that childhood. And of course, now I was a grown up, I was married, I had a child, and and that wasn't helping me being fragmented like that. Right? That's when it started. It wasn't disruptive as a kid, it was brilliant as a kid.
Yeah.
But as an adult, it was confusing and sometimes upsetting. Yeah.
No, that makes so much sense. I'm curious because a lot of people will describe their experience, right? I've heard people say, I wish they never renamed DID because I feel like I have different people that I share my head with who feel very different from me. They have names, they have characteristics, depending on the presentation, as you know, right? Different voices, inflections, body language, etc. For people who have that orientation,
Yeah.
can you take us through the shift into your framework of that experience from, I see them as nouns and as
Right.
people in my head, to what you're describing as a flow, to kind of give somebody a bird's eye view of what that feels?
I think the best way I can describe it is from a part in the book, there's a state of mind named Jessica. And my states of mind, mostly they had some kind of name. Some weren't names, some were purposes. But I will say all my states of mind had some very specific purposes. None of them were
Okay.
there gratuitously. They all had jobs. And that was sort of the work of therapy, finding out what their job was, how they helped. And Dan would greet every new state with asking, do you know who I am? And can you tell me what your name is? When were you born? How old were you when you were born? How did you help Sally? What was your job? I don't think he ever said, what was your job? But that's how I thought of it. So I had a state of mind named Jessica, and Jessica haunted me for a long time. And Jessica did something that I wasn't aware of. I didn't know that it was Jessica, that was very threatening and dangerous. And it's the first time Dr. Siegel felt I needed to be hospitalized for safety. So he didn't feel like we could do that work while I was driving home from his office every day. So we went in the hospital, and Jessica was a teenager, right? And she was done. She didn't want anything to do with any of this stuff. I mean, it was so classic adolescent, right? She even smoked, and I didn't smoke, but I did as a kid, right?
Yeah.
And so Jessica was a very distinct state of mind, and she had a name, and she hated everybody. She hated me, she hated my parents, she hated all the stage. She especially hated the young, very, very young parts who had been very sexualized. She just wanted to be a normal teenager. But by the end of our work with Jessica, which took lots of time, I maintained all her gifts, all her knowledge, her way of being. But I didn't smoke anymore. I never smoke, right? But once I had I think the difference for me is once I could be present with a state of mind and could absorb that memory into, integrate that memory of what Jessica held for me, then Jessica's job was over. Not that Jessica was gone, but she could kind of relax and just become a part of the whole. So I never lost any. I understand. I could see how, if I had chosen I mean, I remember points Dan talking about how some people with DID didn't want to give up their parts, that they felt like it was an important part of them. And I understand that. And I'm not even sure that I actually chose not to do that, but the way my mind worked they just became kind of part of the fabric of who I was.
That makes so much sense, and it's what I notice a lot. It seems more, and maybe this is just my own kinda anecdotal experience, that it does feel like everybody's brain does whatever is best for it. And for some people, it seems that there is a level of separation and differentiation
Yeah.
that is maintained, and for other folks, it's kinda the opposite, but in both cases, it seems like neither was really going for the end result, it just unfolded in
Yes.
the course of healing.
And that's one of the things that I think was very different from what I've heard, the way Dan treated me. He did not have, or at least none that he shared with me, a preconceived notion of how this should unfold. The only preconceived notion I think he had was an incredibly positive point of view that by the end of my therapy, I would no longer be suffering from the constraints of my childhood. Yeah.
And that's really what it's all about, right? Can we help people live a life that feels worthwhile and satisfying to them, whatever that looks like? It's gonna be different.
And for me, what it looks like now, which maybe is what people don't understand sometimes when I say I don't dissociate, is I don't get triggered. Do you know? If I hear, I mean, with all the Epstein stuff, which it's incredibly disturbing and upsetting. I've written a couple of blogs about it, right? But I'm not triggered by it. I don't fall back into the days when I was being abused, or the days that I didn't know I was being abused and didn't understand why I felt certain things. It doesn't interfere at all in the way I view my life anymore. It doesn't inform the way I view my life anymore. The suffering is over. The memory is intact. I mean, so now somebody said, like when Dan asked me that first day, what kind of childhood did you have? And I said, a good childhood. Incoherent, right? Didn't make sense. Now I could tell you, and I mean, I kind of did in my book, right? And it just flows. It's not upsetting. The only time I cry when I read out loud at readings about my book is when I'm talking about my son and my ex-husband. I don't cry about any of the parts of my childhood anymore. It's done. I've made sense of it. I understand it. Yeah.
When you're talking about it, I had
Yeah.
this vision almost of like a, a bird being able to see so clearly behind you, around you, beneath you, above you. It's a different, yeah, just a different state almost where there's this integrated understanding of everything.
And which is exactly what, remember, it making sense. It says, making sense can be seen as an integrative process linking past, present, and potential future, right? Yeah. It's very liberating. When people ask me what my therapy was like with Dan, I use two words. It was illuminating and liberating, ultimately. Yeah.
You can't get better than that.
I know, I know, I know, I know.
Question for listeners that I think feel very attached to, I mean, I feel very attached to my own sort of self states or selves or so many different things that we can call them, right?
Right. I think we get to call them whatever we want to.
There we go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I change like insiders, whatever. It kind of goes
Yeah.
all over the
Yeah.
place
Yeah.
for us. But I wonder, I think there are going to be people who are like, are you still feeling them?
Yeah.
Do you miss them? And that sort of line of
Yeah.
thinking. What is that like for you as you experience it right now?
Right. So I never miss them. I never feel lonely. In fact, even when I'm alone and sort of feeling lonely, I don't feel lonely, like I'm all alone in the world. So I don't miss them. I don't they don't come to mind anymore, specifically different states of mind. I can have a state of mind that can have fun, right? Like Jessica, the teenager. I've actually written a piece recently about the part of me that I think was the original part of me. I mean, this is just me. I don't know that there's any scientific basis for this, but I think there was a core part of me that didn't show up for a long time in therapy because it wasn't safe. And when it was safe, I could find that, I could know that part that truly was love, right? And had been protected for all these years, right? It was the part that could love, could give love, could receive love. And of course, why wouldn't that be? Why wouldn't me going to adopt a child ignite all the other parts that I had to go through to free the part of me that could love and be loved in a deep, deep way? right? So I feel love a lot, but I don't call up that state of mind because now it's just it's global inside of me. All the parts are global, even the parts that are angry and mad. A lot of them are, I remember them all, but I don't refer to them or they don't pop up. Yeah. But I haven't
Yeah, I
forgotten
love how
about
you
any of them.
it's beautiful how you're talking about it. I think there can be such fear sometimes for
Yes.
people who are literally scared of this. I don't know what to call it because, I feel like
Right.
integration and final fusion gets completed and
Yeah.
then people see the end of X, Y, or Z. But the way that you're describing your experience is pretty beautiful.
Well, it was an opening and a beginning. And another thing I'll say that I think is really important to understand, especially for someone who, they've now shown within the attachment research world that developing disorganized attachment can be something that causes DID. Not everybody with disorganized attachment develops DID, but it is one cause of DID. I don't know if cause is the right word. I can't think of it. But so one of the things that I think is so important for therapists to know about is that the therapeutic relationship, right? The therapeutic bond. What we now know is that they used to think, by age 3, if you that you couldn't change your brain, right, after
Right.
age 3, right? And I think that's why so many people that knew more than Paul and I knew about childhood development when we brought Sam home were so worried, right, about the damage of the 16 months, which Dr. Siegel in 1990 knew wasn't true, right? So now what we know, and I think it's just been the last 30, maybe 40 years, they've added a new category to the adult attachment scale, which is earned or learned secure attachment. And that's what I believe I have. I had disorganized attachment. Now I have earned, or I think Dan started calling it learned. And so I carry my safety and security with me. I have secure attachment. And I think this is accurate. It might not be, but there's really no measurable difference for a human being that has secure attachment from childhood or learned secure attachment in adulthood.
That's pretty amazing when
Yeah.
you think about what originally literature used
It's
to
real.
say.
And think about the importance of that for everything that's happening in our world.
So, would you characterize the way in which you developed slash earned that secure attach basically was therapy or the relationship of therapy the vehicle for that?
100%. 100%. Dr. Siegel met me where I was at every step of the way. Every step of the way. And you know something he would say to me often, and the first time he said it to me was a pivotal moment in my therapy, and I talk about it in my book. I was having a really hard time with what I was unveiling, what I was learning, what I was knowing, how I was feeling, everything. And we were just kind of on the cusp of really some information. I mean, I knew it was coming, right? And I was like, I just can't, I can't do this. I can't know this. And I looked at him, I think I said something like, what if I'm not strong enough to know this? And he looked at me very, very, again, kindly connecting. He didn't say, no, that's wrong. You're great. No, he said, Sally, you've already survived it. You've survived. It's going to be painful to remember, but you're remembering it. It's not happening again. And that really changed my trajectory, I think. I could withstand the pain of it because I knew it was remembering it wasn't going to happen again. Just like I started to understand that I could have a state of mind that was trying to be known, that was destructive and mean and violent and rageful, right? And Dan would put all kinds of things in place so to assure me that he felt safe with this part coming. And then the part would come and it was a child. It was a kid who was like, really mad, wanted to kill everybody. Like Jessica wanted me to drive off the road and kill myself. But what I realized, she's a teenager. She didn't know it would kill me. She didn't know killing me would kill her. Right. She just was kind of like a mean girl, right? Just want me out of the picture. Yeah.
It makes so much sense when you talk about the developmental, logical kids.
And knowing that endeared them to me, right? I was like, "Oh my god, look, it's like this is who I am. I'm someone who felt that. I'm someone who felt this. The only thing that got in the way was my childhood."
I'm literally sitting here thinking, what a gift to have a therapist who had the ability to hold the belief in you
Yes.
when you couldn't do that for very good reasons.
100%. And that's truly, I'm not trying to plug my book, but that's what my book is. And that's when I realized that people didn't understand how healthy self-therapy around these issues could be and how liberating. I wanted to, and it wasn't manualized. It wasn't like Dan has a list of you have to do this, this, and this part has to be there. And no, it just was a natural unfolding but his ability to hold it all. And I don't ever remember him ever once telling me a state couldn't show up or that I had to do something before. I mean, it was just, he got to know them all.
When you said that, my entire body just opened up.
Oh,
I think
right?
there's so, as a therapist working in the field, you
Yes.
see people out there who keep saying things like, and I make all the people not on purpose angry who are doing it correctly. So we want to acknowledge all the people
That's
that are
right.
doing amazing work.
That
This
I
is not
agree.
directed at you.
No, but there's a segment that I think could
Yeah.
really use some new tools. Yeah.
Yeah. This idea that parts aren't allowed in the room and you're not supposed to dissociate when, I mean, hello.
I mean, it was
That's
just the opposite with me. I think Dan was creating a beautiful, safe space so dissociation could unfold because otherwise, how are we ever gonna? You just can't get rid of it. You've got to blend. I mean, it's that idea of integration, which you get rid is, you know, being a fruit salad, not a smoothie, right?
yeah.
And maintaining your differences. So I have all these different ways of being in the world, which we all have different ways of being in the world for DID, in my case for DID, they just didn't know about the other parts. But once it opened up and we got linked, it's just life is, even when life is really, really hard and crappy and sad, I feel grounded. Yeah. It doesn't mean I don't
And
feel sad or upset or get mad, but I rarely get so mad that I'm like being triggered by something. Yeah.
such a beautiful fluidity.
And that's how it feels. It just feels like it's fluid. The way I think, the way I feel, it's fluid. It's not segmented.
My brain is coming up with all of these analogies,
Good.
some of
Yeah.
which are amusing to me, just
Uh,
thinking about my own experience.
yeah. I think
I have this image of somebody learning to drive a standard when everything is different and it's kind of jerky versus the
that's
automatic transmission that's just
that's
kind of
right.
flowing.
That's right. It's very that's a great it is like doing a stick shift. It's like, and all the things that yeah, that's very funny. I'm not sure I could drive a stick shift anymore. That's funny.
I don't know if I could either. So
Yeah, yeah.
I used to
Right.
all the time, but
Yeah, me
you,
too. My
you
first
remember that when you're just getting started, what it's like to get into first gear.
And I lived in Los Angeles and I had a stick shift and I was on a hill like, a very steep hill and I just knew I was gonna go. I was terrified, right? That I was just gonna roll
Going backwards.
backwards. Yeah, and there was a bunch of cars
Yeah.
behind me. So it's like coordinating, right, to try to get that just right. Yeah, it's a lot of work. That's what
Just
it was
kind
a
of
lot of work. It's not a lot of work for me anymore to face what I need to deal with, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah.
what I love about this is I really do think that it helps people who are afraid of the process
Yeah.
to be less afraid.
It's terrifying, right? But the terror is okay, this is an important term for me. I think it might have been one of the many first things Dan said early on said to me that I was like, "Oh," I mean, it was like mind-blowing and changed everything when he explained to me the difference between implicit and explicit memory, right? Very early on before I was diagnosed, it was clear I had no memory of my childhood, but yet I had all these feelings I couldn't make sense of. And I said, "How can I have no memory but all these feelings?" And he said, "That's because of the implicit memory." And he said, "You explicit memory, the brain encodes memory two ways, explicitly. And when you retrieve an explicit memory, it comes with a tag that says, I'm remembering something from the past. But when you retrieve an implicit memory, and most memory up until the age of 3 is encoded implicitly because the hippocampus isn't fully developed. When you retrieve an implicit memory, you don't know it's coming from the past, right? It's a memory of a feeling, but you think it's about what's happening to you now. I mean, it's certainly the building block of a flashback. And where
Yeah.
people, and it's not the same as the unconscious or subconscious, because what implicit memory means, I am feeling this terror right now in the moment, right? Fully in conscious awareness. But what's not in conscious awareness is that it's from my history.
Yeah.
And when I explained this to a friend years ago who's a lifelong Al Anon person, she said, "That sounds like something we say in Al Anon." I said, "What's that?" I use this phrase all the time, personally and professionally. She said, "We say, if I'm hysterical, it's historical." And I just love that. So it's sort of a mantra for me. Doesn't have to be hysteria. I think of it as, if I'm having a reaction to a situation and I'm sort of like, that's a weird reaction, whether it's like I'm too angry and it doesn't deserve it, or, if a friend calls up and says they won, $1 billion in the lottery, and I'm like, oh, well, that's nice. It's like,
Yeah.
I got to look at me. What's going on with me with that reaction? Yeah, it's my stuff.
That's so helpful. I think back years ago, like a really long time ago, when I really didn't know much about
Yeah.
implicit versus explicit memory. And I do recall psychiatrists talking about folks who can have treatment resistant depression. And I'm not saying this is the case for everybody with, quote, treatment resistant depression, but how some of that could literally be memory.
Yes. Memories of feelings.
Yeah.
So it's the feeling that it's so strong, but it's a memory of a feeling. So it's not going to hurt you anymore. It's just going to be painful once you remember it. But once you remember it and work through it, then it becomes explicit. And then you just know, yeah, I was really angry a long time
Yeah.
ago, or really terrorized or whatever. You don't feel the terror anymore.
It's so confusing when you're the person that that's happening to in the moment, right? Because you can get almost like the wind knocked out of you from this unbelievable grief or sadness, or
That's
all of a
right.
sudden you're terrified.
Yeah. It's debilitating, but it's inaccurate. It's inaccurate for the moment. So we've got to process it so you can become explicit. So you can just, like, now I can tell you, as a child, I had a terrifying childhood, but I don't feel terrorized by it anymore. Yeah.
Which makes so much sense because it sounds like you have that in its historical data point rather
Yes.
than kind of
Yeah.
bleeding into the present.
Yes. And it's one of the first things I teach all my clients, because we all have some implicit stuff that sneaks in. And once you kind of start to understand where it comes from, it diminishes with time, because you can harness the power of neuroplasticity to change it. Yeah. To work
Yeah.
for you instead of against you. Yeah.
There's a significant number of clinicians that listen, and I have a feeling many of them might want to know, in your experience, if you feel that your process with Dan was primarily self-led, meaning you showed up and what unfolded,
Yeah.
or if he was sort of directing
Yeah.
traffic, so to speak.
No, I don't think of him as directing traffic ever. He created an incredibly safe space. And if I was too afraid to do something, we would talk about it. He would meet me at the fear. We would talk about the fear, and we would unravel the fear and get me to the place where I couldn't, because he knew I had to eventually, to be free of that fear, understand it, and would probably have to meet the state of mind that this particular fear was held by. But he was very, very, very neutral in so many ways, except that I was safe, I wasn't crazy, and we were going to figure this out together. I mean, a couple of times I was hospitalized 3 times, 3 or 4 times. I write about 2 of the times in the book. And all of those times were because he was afraid that I wasn't gonna be safe. And not some of it was safe. A couple times he was afraid I wasn't gonna be safe just in general, but it was never for suicidality, it was for internal homicide, right? Which was such an interesting concept, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't want me driving. I lived in Southern California, and my house was in Malibu, and his office was in Brentwood. So I was driving up the coast highway, which was not a very safe road. Anyway, he didn't want me doing that at the end of some session. So we'd go in the hospital. And a couple of times I came into therapy with some self-harm, visible, and he would insist that we talk about it, right? And he would
Yeah.
want to state, so for my safety, yes, But otherwise, no. I mean, he explained the process to me. He explained what my mind had done, the fragmenting. And he said, we're going to meet the fragmented parts and figure out what's going on. But he did not, he just, I would have a feeling and that I needed to talk about something or some state wanted to be known. Sometimes it would take weeks of sessions before one, because he wasn't like, well, it has to, or I'm not going to see you again if you can't bring this part out, right? Ever, ever. And we did. But then it came out and then he got to know it. And sometimes he got to know it before me and then I could get to know it. And then eventually both of us could know it all at the same time. And then as therapy progressed, more states got involved in each session. Yeah, making sense of what was going on.
You're describing such beautiful relational work.
It was unbelievable. It was like I said, it was one of the most productive times of my life. It's not that I miss it, I don't, but I treasure it. It was just such a, but I had no idea that a lot of therapists didn't work like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they really don't.
Yeah.
That's a gift. I mean, I
Yeah.
think we see I don't want to say so often, but I certainly am involved in the training of newer clinicians, and some of them are coming out of school feeling that therapy is delivering a conveyor belt of intervention
Yeah.
rather
No.
than a true partnership. And when
Yeah.
you talk about your relationship with Dan, I can see all of these different roles that he played, from
Yes.
educator to safe attachment figure to a true partner.
Yes.
We're in this together, watching out for your safety. There's
Yes.
so many things that he did so beautifully, it sounds like.
Yeah. He really did. He also did something that I know a lot of therapists think is wrong. I could call him anytime, right? And sometimes I would call him and leave a message, I really need to talk to you. And he sometimes didn't get back to me right away, but he would get back to me as soon as he could. Sometimes I would just leave a message and say, this is what's happening. I just wanted to leave a message so you would know. Sometimes I just would listen to his voice, right? And that would be enough for me. And sometimes if something really upsetting had happened, he would suggest that if it was good for me, to let him know in a few hours how I was doing, right? But he never insisted. He never insisted on anything except safety. If I was not safe, then that was a different situation. Then we had to deal with it right away. Yeah.
Which makes sense. You can't work with somebody who's not on the planet.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. 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 He was incredibly supportive in every way.
I really love that you shared that about being able to have some contact with him in between sessions. I know that there are a lot of therapists who would like to have a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's what therapy is really about. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone's asking a therapist to work 24/7 and spend endless amounts of time on the phone. But I do really believe for people who have DID and OSDD, where you don't have access necessarily
Yeah.
to things during the session all the time, we do have experiences that happen later in the day. And these days, it's so easy between email or text messaging to be able to just kind of capture it.
To connect. You think about attachment, that's what it is. It's the connection. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's like, as a therapist myself, I'm really quick to get back to clients as soon as I can, not to leave it lingering, because even if it's just about an appointment, it's it's the 4 S's of secure attachment, right? It's being seen, being safe, being soothed, and those 3 S's equals the 4th S, which is secure, right?
So beautiful.
Yeah, it's really knowing who your client is. It doesn't mean, like, as a therapist myself, I mean, if I have a client that would like a check-in, but I just have no time, there's like no way it's going to happen today, I'll say possibly tomorrow, here's some times, but if they call and it's an absolute urgent crisis, I would make time for it. But just because they need you today doesn't mean, and you get to know your clients, right? And you get to know
Yeah.
the tone of it. But yeah, I don't think that, I mean, my training was in a psychodynamic clinic, which, blank slate, and I just don't, and everything I know now about attachment just is attachment doesn't mean no boundaries, but it does mean we're in a relationship here. This isn't just a 9 to 5 situation. Yeah.
It's so important. I think sometimes people also miss what happens with the younger who
Yes.
just, some of them who don't even really have object permanence and they just need
No,
to know you're there.
that's right. And I had tons of those. I had like clusters of nonverbal, the little girls, and they can be very elusive. And in many ways, they would just hide and we would have to find them. Eventually got all known, but like they were like kids. They don't speak up. Yeah.
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 Well, especially when it hasn't been safe
That's right. Or
previously.
or they don't have the words. Yeah, exactly.
Of
Exactly.
that too.
That too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this idea of being flexible and open. And it sounds like you just did such a beautiful job of allowing your process to truly unfold and blossom.
That's how it was a complete unfolding. And listen, I also recognize how lucky and privileged I was to be able to devote all these years to full-time therapy. I mean, it was incredible. But the way I think about it is I could have had a really bad therapist and I would have devoted the same amount of time. It was, yeah, and I don't think you have to be Dan to be a good therapist. I don't think I'm the only person in the world that should have this experience. And I know I'm not, but there are tools, especially today, that something like interpersonal neurobiology offers. Like I said, it informs therapy. It's not a form of therapy. And it really is about understanding who we are as therapists so that we're not getting triggered. I mean, one of the reasons I didn't start working with people with DID when I first came out because I didn't get my master's until I was in my 40s after therapy, was I didn't feel equipped, even with my history, right? Because I didn't have enough experience as a therapist. And I know it's not always possible. I mean, you can't always have like a seasoned therapist, but I don't understand why things like neuroplasticity and I mean, just so much of the neuroscience that we know about now isn't being taught across the country and all the institutions that are training therapists. Yeah.
I have questions about why a lot of things aren't being
That's
taught, like, DID, what it is, for
that's right,
example.
exactly. That it's not Sybil. I mean, yeah,
It's yeah.
yeah, it's not Sybil. Yeah, it's not MPD anymore. And I'm not yeah, I mean, you have to really have an understanding of what it is and what it means to your client. Yeah.
We still have people in the field who don't believe DID is real,
I know. I
right?
know.
And it's 2026.
26, yeah. I don't know I don't understand where that comes from, except I think it means that I think a lot of therapists have a lot of work to do on themselves, yeah,
1000%
yeah.
agree.
And it's a lifelong process making sense, it doesn't stop because you finish school or finish therapy, you aren't constantly making sense of your world, yeah,
I think it's hard for people sometimes to let go of constructs that make them feel safe in the
yeah,
world. So if there's a narrative that reflects back that the way I live in the world is, quote, normal and accepted, then everybody else must be like me for me to continue getting that sort of validation,
yeah,
rather than, there's a lot of ways to live in the world. And this concept of, I guess,
yeah.
is a little odd.
Yeah, well, it just doesn't it's not real anymore, is it? Yeah, we're all
Yeah.
different, yeah.
And it probably never was real. Like,
Yes,
we've been subjected to some pretty significant masking over time,
yes.
throughout time, I should say. And it's somewhat liberating now for people to be able, and I know not everyone has the privilege to be able to say, this is who I am and this is how I'm kind of put together right now
Right.
and be accepted. But I love that more and more people are doing that.
And therapists, I think to be a qualified to be a good therapist, an effective therapist, you have to really understand where your vulnerabilities are so they don't get in the way of your work with a client.
Yeah, doing your own work is really important.
And constantly, staying on atop of the newest research. Not just the newest fads, but truly the research. Yeah. And
Really love that you
and
differentiated that.
and lived experience. I think it's really important to incorporate all that, to respect it all. Yeah.
That's a dance that the field has historically had some
Yes.
issues with.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, if we're talking about substance abuse, eating
Yeah.
disorders, depression, or DID,
Yeah.
there's always been a level of tension between those with lived experience and those without.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that, I'm opinionated. You've probably figured this out already.
Right.
We all have significant and important contributions.
Yes.
But I do think it's important to listen to the voices of those with lived experience
Yeah.
to really understand how they're impacted.
I think one of the greatest, I hate to call it a gift, I can't, one of the greatest assets I have is, for a long time, I didn't tell clients I had DID. Kind of just was like DID, right? Even though I didn't feel like that, it was everyone around. But I would tell people as I was being a therapist, especially people who had intense trauma, that I'd had intense trauma. And I would tell them a little bit about it. And I'd tell them that, I'd resolved it and I was good now, right? But then when I wrote the book, I thought I've got to start telling my clients, because I don't want any of my clients to walk into a bookstore and see that their therapist, either current or past, had DID, because who knows what they think of it. So I started telling clients, and they've been incredible. It's almost like it enriches their experience with me.
I love that.
And
I just had this vision of one of your clients walking into the bookstore and maybe having the orientation of Sybil.
yes,
You know?
exactly. Which
Yeah.
most people, well, also what was surprising to me is how many people didn't even know what DID was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, when I look at the prevalence and statistics, it's mind blowing
Yeah.
that talk about it.
I know. And I haven't seen it written anywhere, but I've heard some people talk about that they think it's even higher, that it's as much as 20 to 30% of the population. And if that's true, that means either you or I know someone or have DID. And now we know that's true because here we are. Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe it was Frank Putnam when I was talking with him. He said he felt that the statistics were much, much higher.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I love the distinction he made in the podcast I heard with a couple of multiples, was why there's more girls and less boys with DID, because boys are more typically abused outside the home. I think
Makes
that's what he
sense.
said. It makes so much sense. Yeah. Because to have disorganized attachment, the trauma has to be the people that you're hardwired to go to, for basically your parents. Yeah. Not that gym teacher or teacher or, a random thing. It's got to be intense and familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my social work brain is doing what my
Yeah.
social work brain
Yeah.
does, which is going to just round that out a little bit for
Okay.
listeners who grow up in different cultures.
Yes.
So that doesn't mean it's only a parent figure, but somebody that is in your daily life
That's
that you
right.
are relying on.
A caregiver, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone you depend on for help.
And it can be, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong,
Okay.
like you can also be in a situation where you are suffering other types of abuse by other members of the household or
Yeah.
extended family that you have close contact with, and your caregivers are still not able to provide you
That's
that
right.
safety and security.
That's right.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that your caregiver has to be the one that
That's
is
right.
abusive.
I think I think this is the way it's talked about, that for disorganized attachment, it's severe, intense abuse or neglect.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. 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 If
And
you're,
when you put all those things together, it makes perfect sense how people end up with DID, OSCD, and different
Yeah.
types of ills.
When we know everything we know now about child abuse, it would be insane to think that DID is not more prevalent. Right?
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Siegel told me often that DID is what saved me. Yeah.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
What other opportunity was there to create a semblance
Yeah.
of safety when
Yeah.
you're that young?
And think about the young mind that creates fantasies. It's a huge imagination. I mean, I don't know that that's connected. I'm not a brain scientist. I'm not a researcher, but my experience was that my brain was incredibly imaginative. Yeah.
That's very relatable for
Yeah.
me as well. I know
Yeah.
there are folks who will say that they believe you need to have some type of ability to visualize to be imaginative. I don't know that that's the case.
Yeah. I don't know that either. No.
I'm curious what you would say to somebody listening today who might be just beginning to come to terms with the fact that they might have OSD or DI themselves, and they feel really kind of overwhelmed and unsure of what to do with that.
Yeah. So first of all, I would say I would try to, and I say this to all my clients, no matter what they're dealing with, to be really kind to themselves, right? That if if we have a dissociative disorder, right, it's a good thing. It came about from the very most protective place. So let's honor that. But if we're not a kid anymore and dependent on that family or that care or that situation, then we're going to want to update our files about what our experience was. Right. And so getting a really good therapist that understands about DID and understands about neuroscience and neuroplasticity and understands it as as a positive adaptation, a brilliant adaptation, that it's going to be hard and it will be painful working this material through. But what shouldn't be painful is the therapeutic experience. It should be completely reparative because that's where the healing happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
For
and to know
folks,
they're not crazy. They're not crazy. And they didn't do anything wrong. They did everything right, actually.
this is such a hopeful
Yeah.
conversation because I think people more and more are going to see DID as a strengths based response to a
Yes.
situation. I think about some clinicians who will say, "Oh, I'm really hesitant to talk with a client about that because it's a quote big diagnosis." And I think just because something has been historically stigmatized doesn't necessarily mean that it's a quote big diagnosis. It's how are you thinking about it as the clinician? And can you do what Dan did
Yes.
and frame it as this thing that is actually a big strength?
When I would try to make it not true, right? I can't have MPD. I'm not civil, right? He said, Sally, the truth is your friend and it will set you free. So let's, who cares what we call it? Your mind is
Yeah.
fragmented. You have different states of mind, alters, parts, whatever we're going to call them in 1991. And we're going to work together to figure this out. And it will be an unfolding, and we will figure it out. It's going to be hard, but it's not going to destroy you because you've already survived it.
What a gift.
Yeah. And for me, it's like mind blowing that everybody doesn't see it that way because this was my model. I'm so lucky that I didn't have any other therapists that misdiagnosed. I will say this. This was so interesting. I don't know that I've even told Dan this. When I first left LA and moved back to Chapel Hill, and we were finished with our therapy, but we were still with a DID therapy, but I was still, would talk to him, before Zoom. And I ran into some real, because I grew up here, right? And I came back here. It was a complete coincidence. It had nothing to do with that I lived here. I came because my son had a learning difference, and there was a school here that was really doing cutting edge work. So we came for that. And I was having some really troubling feelings. And Dan and I talked, and he said, I think you're going to need someone in person there because we were just on the phone. He said, and I happen to know someone that he'd met somewhere who was a psychiatrist also and that specialized in DID. So I went to see him and I saw him 3 or 4 times and he was exactly the opposite of Dan. He saw it as bad. He didn't believe I wasn't dissociating anymore and I wasn't. And one day, and he's no longer living, so I won't say his name, but I can talk about it. One day, like just the last time I saw him, he called me by the wrong name. And I was like, I'm not whatever that name is. I'm Sally. And he said, no, no, no. Last time you were here, you were this person. I was like, oh no. I mean, I was like, this can't be happening. But I knew, no, that is absolutely not true. And I also recognized it as a name that I'd never had apart, right? And never, right?
Oh,
Ever,
geez.
ever. And after about 10 minutes of me really struggling, but defending myself, he realized he had the wrong notes,
Oh my gosh.
the wrong notes. And I don't know if we all make mistakes, but that never happened with Dan, right? In 10 years, ever.
It's a little horrifying. I mean, I
Yeah.
know people can make mistakes, but you should not be making mistakes with your clients when you're
Yeah.
working in mental health to that degree.
Yeah. But it was also the way he handled it wasn't great. It wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same. Yeah.
I love the fact that you've had the experience that you've had for so many different reasons. And one of those reasons is that your voice is so powerful, and where you are in your life and what you're doing in terms of your career and your personal life and all of those things, I think is such a shining example for how relational therapy works, how you can trust your client's process,
Yes.
like look out for the basics of keeping them safe, etc. But we don't have to have these external rules like don't ever talk to the parts. I know I'm offending people that talk to the parts and keep talking to parts. That's what we want.
That's right. That's
But
right.
there are people who believe that there's something pathological about that and that it's wrong and that they're quote encouraging it. And that's not the case. And I think it's lovely to have you say, I've had this relationship, I had it years ago, and I'm really healed.
I'm really healed. I'm really healed. I'm almost want to say cured, but I know we don't use that word in our field, but I have no remnants of dissociative identity disorder anymore. I have full memory of the response of dissociation to my
Yeah.
very troubled childhood. But it's not, I don't, as Dan would say, I no longer am living in a prison of the past. I'm freed of the constraints of my past. Yeah. The truth did set me free. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It's incredible. Yes.
When you're no longer experiencing the difficult feelings of parts that they're experiencing from the
That's right.
past, and that's bleeding into your present and interfering with your ability to work or care for yourself or your kids or have friendships. That's where the disorder piece comes in. I think there are folks that get really angry about calling it a disorder, but again, it's impairment in functioning.
That's
If you're
right.
living with differentiated selves and you're cooperating and you have a way of communicating and it's working, beautiful. Nobody's telling you to change that. I think there's a wide variety of presentations of healed.
Exactly. And the key is to understand how your mind works, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes my experience is it was problematic when I couldn't figure out why do I feel like I am going to be arrested when I get in my car and drive anywhere? Why is it I feel terrified? Why is it when I read two books about family and adoption to my brand newly adopted child about how loving it is to be from a family and have parents and beautiful, beautiful, loving situation that tears are just pouring out of my eyes. Why is that? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't because there was something wrong with my son. And imagine if he had grown up with a mother who thought there was something wrong with him. Yeah.
And the intergenerational trauma
There you
keeps
go.
moving,
There you
right?
go. Yeah. And it didn't happen. Yeah.
Hopeful.
Yeah. It is. And I wanted to convey the hope because that's how I feel. And I'm very hopeful as a therapist that I can help people. And I've had so many clients who have been told by previous clients that something's happened to them that they'll never be able to live without the specter of it. It's just, I don't think it's true. You can't make it go away, but you can make sense of it so it doesn't interfere in your day-to-day living.
Which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
If you could give therapists who are listening
Yeah.
any advice about working with clients who have DID, OSDD, what would that advice be?
Well, I'd say first, to not be afraid of it, to embrace it. But I'd also say get some education about neuroscience. Take a couple of courses. Dan did a course on it's called Assessing and Treating Disorganized Attachment and Dissociation, which I'm part of. He's written a couple of books. I think it's Mindsight and The Mindful Brain that I'm a case study in. I mean, he doesn't call me Sally, but you'll know it's me, right? And it shows how we work together. Read my book. It'll show you how we work together. But what my book will show you isn't how to do therapy. It shows you how to think about being in therapy, right? And meeting your client where they're at and not bringing your preconceived notions of what DID is, what it isn't. And if you don't believe it, then you should find someone else for that client to go see.
Great advice.
Because even if you don't believe it, something's going on. Let's figure out what's going on. Maybe it isn't DID, but let's figure it's something.
Yep.
And it's not crazy. It's not, it's something, I mean, it might be, I don't know, maybe it is crazy, but we need to know that too, right? I mean, I can't remember the last time I thought anybody was crazy, but you know what I mean?
Literally love that you said your book will show people how to think about being in therapy.
It will, it'll, I think, I mean, that seems to be the feedback I'm getting from people I know, people that I don't know, therapists, non-therapists. It's really, I mean, it starts with the day I'm driving to him the first time ever, and it ends just a couple of years ago when I was no longer his patient, but something had happened in my life that kind of bookends the whole book that had a very good outcome, and I'm talking to him about it. Yeah,
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah.
This has been such an incredible conversation. I've had so much fun.
Me too, me too. We'll have to do it again sometime.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely would love that. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to talk about?
I mean, psychoeducation, I think, is really essential. People need to understand. It's helpful for clients to understand how their mind works. So whether you have DID or depression or anxiety, to understand just basics, like Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain can be incredibly helpful. The wheel of awareness. So Dan Siegel's wheel of awareness, which is a mindful practice that I do every day. And people can go to drdansiegel.com, and for free, you can learn about the wheel of awareness. He has recorded versions of it, short ones, middle size, advanced, beginners, 100% free. And I think, and I asked him if I could say this, and he said he was fine with me saying it, that doing the wheel of awareness as a person or as a therapist is like an immersion into interpersonal neurobiology. You really will see what integration is, because you're touching on all the domains in a meditative way or mindful awareness practice way. I think to make it for therapists to understand about making sense of their own lives. I mean, as a therapist, I know you must feel it. There are sometimes I'm like, I don't understand why I'm feeling this with a client. I'm going to keep this to myself right now because this is my work, not their work. But I've got to figure out why this is happening to me, because it is not going to help my client. Yeah. It's kind of like being a parent in that way. You know, we don't want to dump our junk on our kids. Yeah.
Yeah. The importance of being in your own therapy, getting consultation,
Yes.
supervision. Can't stress that
Yeah.
enough.
I mean, I think it's you have to be in conversation with other therapists and have therapy and supervision. Absolutely. Yeah. So just always work on yourself, whether you're a non-therapist working on yourself or a therapist. I mean, we're all human. We need to the making sense process is a lifelong process. And it's so great.
Yeah.
It's such a great moment when I realize, oh, that's why that is, right? Or when I feel like a new neural network has been made. So I'm not beating myself up for something because I've intentionally tried to change it. And it's almost like a little electrical circuit. I think it's what Oprah calls an aha moment. It's almost like, oh, a little light just went off. And I think literally a little light goes off in the brain when that new connection is created. Yeah.
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 You can almost feel it.
You can almost
actually.
feel it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's good.
I will make sure to link to all of the resources, your
Okay.
book, your website for sure. And then the resources that you mentioned that Dan has. I think lots of folks are going to be also really interested in trying the wheel of awareness. It feels like
It's so great. And on my website, all the talks Dan and I are available on it. I don't know when this is going to air, but we are doing a workshop on March 20th at the Networker Symposium called Interpersonal Neurobiology in Action, the Science of Healing and Connection. So it's really about our work, and that from my point of view, it's about the therapeutic bond. And I'm going to try to get Dan to talk a little bit about his end of the therapeutic bond. And so and all those things are are listed in my website. And as I do new things, and all my podcasts I'll put on there too. Also, resource wise, the work of Ruth Lanius and Bethany Brand, especially their Finding Solid Ground. And Ruth has a new book out called Sensory Pathways of the Brain or to the Brain. Their work, and I've read both their books, and I've taken some webinars with them. And Ruth, self-disclosed, has endorsed my book. But their work now, the thing that blows me away is it resonates for me the way Dan taught me about my brain over 30 years ago. Yeah, very similar. Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah,
I'll link to that as well.
yeah. They're incredible, the work they're doing. Yeah.
This has been such a great
It's-
conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Yeah. And let's keep in touch.
Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Whether you are someone living with DID, you are a clinician, a supporter, there is definitely something in this episode for you. So many nuggets of wisdom. And we are so grateful to the work that Sally is doing. We highly encourage you to purchase her book and see what you think. It sounds incredibly enjoyable. We have our copy and can't wait to dig into it. We'll link all of the resources in the show notes for you all so they're easy to get to. And until next time, let's keep healing. Thank you for tuning in. You can find our blog on Substack at healingmyparts.substack.com and on Instagram at healingmyparts. Just a disclaimer, any information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for professional therapy or behavioral health care. Nor does listening to the podcast constitute a therapist-client relationship. Please be sure to take extra good care of you. And until next time, keep healing and thriving.